Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that. But it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolong Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolong is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's prolonlife.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, 5 days before her wedding, Yale doctoral student Annie Lay vanished from her Ivy League campus. Rumors swirled that she was a runaway bride, that is, until her decomposing body was found stuffed into the walls of the famed university. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my formidable co-host, Alice.
Actually, I'm not very large, so thank you for saying that. Formidable in reputation, maybe?
Exactly.
And
that was Lori's. So.
Oh.
If you consider that an insult, you can blame her.
No, I like that a lot. I just am not called formidable in a physical sense very often.
You can be formidable even if you're, small. Like bulldogs, right?
That's
right. A lot of ferociousness.
The first time I actually saw a bulldog and knew, I'm sure I saw lots of bulldogs as a kid, but the first time I actually saw a bulldog, like the Yale mascot, I was like, those are tiny little things. For all their bark and all their, ferocity, they're really little.
I know. They're very lazy too. I guess a bulldog could really get after you, but they seem like they're much happier just like laying around.
I think they're pretty
biting
cuddly.
Someone.
And they
exactly.
breathe really. They have labored breathing, which makes me sad. As someone with asthma, I feel it.
Yeah, I don't think we did them any favors with our selective breeding. But what are you gonna do?
They are super cute, though.
They are super cute. Well, speaking of bulldogs, our podcast takes us to Yale today, Alice's alma mater. And, this is going to be one of those sickening podcasts where we have to hear about Alice and Yale the whole time. But we'll somehow make it through. And we're talking about the case of Annie Lay. And Alice has mentioned this case many times. It's something that Alice lived through when she was at Yale. And we decided, let's do a deep dive on this and really talk about the case. Before we get into it, though, Alice, do you want to talk a little bit about what it was like to be on campus when this unsolved murder story was going on?
Absolutely. We've talked about Annie Lay several times in passing in other episodes and in our Get Vocals, too, when people ask me, when did when did, I guess, true crime really grip me personally? And it was Annie Lay's tragic story for me. It was my first semester of law school at Yale. And so everything is new. It was the beginning of the semester. There was the buzz in the air with the beginning of the semester. September, the leaves were starting to turn colors. Really, honestly, everything was hopeful, right? You're meeting new people, you're getting your classes, you're excited for the semester to start. And really, within the first couple of weeks, this gripping news flew across campus, and that was a fellow student, Annie Lay, was missing. I mean, truly, she just didn't come home. She lived, a couple blocks from where I lived in East Rock. And it was one of those things where there's lots of jokes about Yale being located in New Haven and New Haven being a very unsafe town, having lots of high violent crime rates. But this was hitting home. This was one of our fellow students. Yale itself really is not a large campus, and it doesn't have a large student population. So when one of us students was missing, it, struck a chord of fear in every single one of us. And it was days that there was no development as to where she was. The entire campus, truly, it was like ice cold all of a sudden, even though the temperature hadn't quite turned to winter, but people hurried from class to class. People didn't look up. Everyone kind of furtively glanced at each other thinking, are you a murderer? Are you a kidnapper? Because it could have been anyone on campus. Just the circumstances, as you'll hear when we dive into this, of her disappearance was that it was likely it was someone actually who had access to all of the secure buildings on campus who did this. And so there was suspicion everywhere among the professors, among the students, among the staff. Truly, everyone was looking over their shoulders thinking, am I next?
We talked about Laura Dickinson's case at Eastern Michigan University and how the campus didn't really learn what was happening until her body was found. It sounds like this very quickly people knew that something was really wrong on campus and that there probably was someone sort of walking amongst you that was responsible for it.
And the thing here is that Annie, I think all of us students could see ourselves in Annie. She was, by all accounts, like a really good, upstanding citizen. She seemed to be a loving person, had lots of friends, was affable, and she was about to get married. Her wedding was just days away. This could have been any of us. And we had this false sense of security on campus that many of you probably face, even if your school is located in an urban area. You kind of have your own bubble within your school, and our bubble had just been truly shattered by Annie's disappearance. And then you'll learn more about the story, and it only gets more tragic.
Brett, before we move on, I know we've already talked about the busy schedule we have ahead of us with trials and just lots of court hearings, and especially because it's the holidays. I'm so glad that we have HelloFresh as a sponsor, because with HelloFresh, you get fresh, pre-proportioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Skip trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. And that's why it's America's #1 meal kit. Brett, just today I got home, was so busy, but thank goodness I had the Korean beef bibimbap ready to cook. My kids were so excited to gobble it all up, and they ate every last bit of it.
And there's something for everyone with HelloFresh. HelloFresh offers 50 menu and market items to choose from every week, including vegetarian, calorie smart, and gourmet options, providing plenty of variety. And you'll save, too, on average, over $65 per month when you order HelloFresh instead of grocery shopping. That's more money to spend on presents and activities. So join us. Go to HelloFresh.com/TP14 and use code TP14 for up to 14 free meals and 3 free gifts. And remember, Green Chef is now owned by HelloFresh, and with a wider array of meal plans to choose from, there's something for everyone. I know we love switching between the brands, and now our listeners can enjoy both brands at a discount on us. So once again, go to HelloFresh.com/TP14 and use code TP14 for up to 14 free meals and 3 free gifts. And you'll know why HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit.
Get this, adults with financial literacy skills have 82% more wealth than those who don't. From swimming lessons to piano classes, us parents invest in so many things to enrich our kids' lives. But are we investing in their future financial success? With Greenlight, you can teach your kids financial literacy skills like earning, saving, and investing. And this investment costs less than that after-school treat. Start prioritizing their financial education and future today with a risk-free trial at greenlight.com/Wondery. Greenlight.com/Wondery.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Let's dive into what happened. It was the start of a new school year. Like I said, fall was starting to turn the leaves just brilliant colors of orange, red, yellow on the campus of Yale University. And while the town where Yale was situated, New Haven, Connecticut, had a reputation of being ridden with violent crime, the Yale campus itself was a safe haven. Campus security monitored the campus 24/7. You could get a ride from any building around campus, even off campus. They really prized their security, and there was just a phone number you could call and get a ride any time of day, any day of the week. And most buildings on campus required a Yale ID card to gain entry. Students were bustling around campus with the excitement of this new year. That is until the entire campus was shaken to learn that 24-year-old Annie Lay, a pharmacology doctoral student in Yale's School of Medicine, had gone missing on September 8th, 2009, just 5 days before her wedding to her college sweetheart. Annie was, in a word, exceptional. She was originally from California, and she excelled in academics, graduating as valedictorian of her high school, and was voted most likely to be the next Einstein. Not only was she smart, she was loved by her peers, who described her as bubbly and endlessly energetic. Though Annie was very close to her Vietnamese American family, she moved across the country to study cell developmental biology at the University of Rochester in upstate New York. And it was there that she met the love of her life, Jonathan Wadowski.
And Alice, it's interesting. You mentioned New Haven is not the safest place, and it seems like colleges are either in very sort of wealthy, well-to-do neighborhoods, or they do tend to be in places that aren't that safe. I mean, you think about like the University of Chicago versus Northwestern, or Harvard versus Yale. Harvard, Cambridge is incredibly nice. I couldn't afford to live there. It's not the kind of place you expect there to be any crime. Obviously, New Haven's a little different, but still on campus, you're supposed to be safe. It's supposed to be, once you walk through those gates, you're in college. You're at, in this case, you're at your doctoral studies, and you're not supposed to have these problems, and you're not supposed to have these dangers. But as we know, too often, colleges really can be hunting grounds for the wrong kind of people, and that's what we're going to see in this case. Alice mentioned Jonathan Wadowski, who was Annie Lay's fiancé, and after graduation, Annie and Jonathan, they had endured a long-distance relationship. Jonathan was pursuing his doctorate at Columbia University in New York City, and Annie was studying pharmacology at Yale. So obviously two really intelligent people. But the distance only strengthened their resolve to be together, and the two were very soon engaged, and they had set their wedding date for September 13th, 2009, which I can't even imagine trying to plan a wedding while doing my doctoral studies, but apparently these two were capable of, I can't even think of words. They were capable of multitasking, so they were going to get married. But then on Tuesday, September 8th, 2009, everything changed. Annie went to the Yale Medical School lab, as she often did, for her research. I'm sure when she set out that day, it was like any other day, and she expected nothing different to happen. But while surveillance cameras captured her entering the building, none of those cameras captured her leaving the building. Annie was reported missing by her roommate that same day. Now, as you can imagine, this is a missing persons case for a moment. And as we've talked about, every time somebody goes missing, people decide that what really happened is this person, has fled and she's gone off. She doesn't want to get married anymore, so she's gone off to start a new life. You guys may remember Brian Schaefer. He was in a long-term relationship when he disappeared mysteriously in a similar circumstance in some ways. Surveillance cameras capture him going into a bar, but they never capture him leaving. And there were people who said, well, he was in this relationship and he really just wanted to be free and away from the responsibilities of medical school, so he probably ran off to start a bar on an island somewhere. People are always going to say that, and sure enough, you had the same kind of rumors going around Yale's campus about Annie. But the rumors may have been wishful thinking, an attempt to tamp down the fears that this petite, 4'11", 90-pound Annie had met with ill will, that the gritty reality of New Haven had infiltrated the idyllic Ivy League bubble, and it wasn't long before everyone's worst fears materialized when, on Annie's wedding day, her body was discovered stuffed into the walls of the medical lab building that she was last seen walking into.
Brett, as we're just giving the background of this case, I remember living through, now I realize, she was missing just 5 days, but those 5 days on campus, living through it every day, there were constant email updates and constant, the school newspaper was publishing articles every single day about those 5 days felt like an eternity, which gives me so much empathy for the loved ones of any victims of missing person cases. If 5 days felt that long for me, I didn't personally know Annie. I can't even imagine the torture of each passing day as you're awaiting news about your loved one, about your family members. So this was my first real experience of having time stand still in a horrific situation.
Yeah, and you hear that a lot from people who talk about how those days lasted a lifetime. And we've obviously talked about a lot of missing persons. I think it's impossible, unless you've experienced that, which I have not. Unless you've experienced that, I can't imagine what it's like. I can't imagine the fortitude it takes when you're in that situation. And we've talked to people who've been the victims of crime and have had family members who've been the victims of crime. And yeah, it's something you never forget, that these are real people who are suffering. And I can only imagine those 5 days. On the one hand, you're hoping she did get cold feet. You're hoping she did run off. If you're her fiance, you're hoping that's what she did. She ran away. She just couldn't take it. And then obviously you find out that your worst fears are true.
Now let's dive into the timeline, because everything happens in actually a very short span of time. Much of the timeline actually comes from an affidavit to search and arrest the suspect, who we'll talk more about momentarily. Before the execution of a search or arrest warrant, The warrants are typically sealed so as not to frustrate the investigation. But once the search or arrest is executed, affidavits are typically unsealed because there is a presumption that anything that does not have a purpose to be sealed should be open to the public. This is kind of the basis of our judicial system. That's why all courts, except maybe in the time of COVID right now for disease containment purposes, are typically open to the public. You should be able to walk into any courtroom and watch any proceeding you want, whether the litigants have anything to do with you or not. Same with filings. All filings, unless they are sealed, are publicly available on the court's docket. Back in the day, it was quite literally like a file cabinet. Nowadays, it's available online. You might have to pay for access to the online system, but to access the documents, except for kind of a nominal fee to pull the documents, they're available to you. You don't have to be a special individual or special tie to the case.
These affidavits can be a wealth of information. If you're ever looking into a case, a great way to find out the facts about the case is to find one of the search warrants in one of these affidavits, because as we talked about before, if you're going to have a warrant, a search warrant, an arrest warrant, you have to show probable cause that a crime was committed, and you have to show probable cause that the person you want to search or the person you want to arrest was involved in that crime in some way, or that searching their residence is likely to produce evidence of that crime. And in order to do that, you have to lay out the facts. You have to lay out your theory. So it's one of the few times where the police really are saying, this is why we believe this happened the way we think it happened. And you don't often get that kind of candor from police, as we all know. But when they're talking to the court, when they're seeking one of these search warrants, then you're going to hear that. So they can be really valuable for any of you out there who are trying to research cases.
Absolutely. And it's called an affidavit because it is just that. The police can't just generally throw spaghetti at the wall, metaphorically, and see what sticks. They actually have a basis to believe every single fact they put into the search warrant. And I said that fact. It can't be rumors. There has to be a basis for knowing that information. And not only that, the affiant, law enforcement officer who signs their name to the affidavit, is swearing to the veracity of what they are signing. So this is very important for the person signing it. They don't need to personally know the information. They don't have to be the person to have uncovered the information, but they have to be able to swear and attest that they know this to be true from other law enforcement officers. With that said, let's dive into what we know about the timeline. So, kind of ironically, but let's go all the way back to February 2009. Annie, as we had already mentioned, was a just amazing multitasker. She was brilliant and also somehow found time to do some extra writing on the side. She authored an article called Crime and Safety in New Haven, which was published in a campus magazine. And in this short article, she advised other students about how to avoid becoming a victim to crime in a city like New Haven. In it, she offers tips, including pay attention to where you are and also avoid portraying yourself as a potential victim. I note this because this shows that Annie, even though she's petite in stature, she thought about her surroundings. She thought about what it meant to be, a small woman in a dangerous city, in an urban city. And she was not just some kind of, head in the clouds Einstein who didn't know anything except her molecular biology sort of information. She was also someone who was offering other students advice on how to be street smart. She wasn't just book smart. On September 8th, 2009 at 10:09 a.m., Annie is captured by surveillance cameras entering a medical lab building located at 10 Amistad Street. She is wearing a green top and black skirt. She's carrying an armful of materials, probably books. That's what they look like. And this is the last time Annie is seen alive. The following timeline comes from that affidavit we were talking about that was filed in support of the suspect's arrest. At 10:11 a.m., Annie's ID is used to swipe into a lab room within the lab building. Specifically, it was to lab G13 at the Yale Animal Research Center. We were all issued IDs at Yale. It has kind of like an internal identification chip within it. Of course, anyone can take your ID to swipe it, but generally you had your card on you at all times. You used it to go to the bathroom because it got you in and out of doors, especially in medical lab buildings, which we'll talk more about. There were kind of sensitive information in there. And so just because you had a Yale ID didn't mean you had access to all buildings. So Annie had special access here. And though we don't know for a fact she swiped the card, by the way, this is where your circumstantial evidence comes in versus direct evidence. It's pretty good information about her movements if her ID card is swiping around, especially at the beginning.
Yeah, and it's only 2 minutes after she walked, or after we see her on the surveillance camera. So you assume that when that swipe happens, it's still her.
Interestingly, her ID is never used to swipe out of the building. Not only do you have to swipe into a building, you actually have to swipe to exit the building. And the security system logs every time your card is swiped.
And, real quick, we talk about, this is sort of an interesting case walking through this timeline for those of you out there to think about the way the police come up with their theories. So sometimes we talk about these cases and people say things like, well, the police immediately focused on one guy. They didn't consider anybody else. They had tunnel vision, right? Well, just this one piece of information that Alice has given you, how it narrows down the suspects. We've talked about New Haven, how it's a violent place, right? And there could be any number of criminals who might target this young lady, but the police now know that she swiped into a building that is controlled by swiping, and she never swipes out. So whoever did this to her, they had to be somebody who had access to the building, and they had to be somebody who could get out of the building without using her card. So even if you imagine it was somebody who grabbed her right before she went in the door and used her card to get in, they didn't use her card to get out. So how'd they get out? And then you start thinking about, it has to be somebody on campus. It has to be somebody who has access. You probably start looking on the security cameras for people, lugging a big garbage can out or something, because you're trying to figure out how she got out of the building. But you can very quickly eliminate a lot of suspects just on the basis of this one piece of information.
Absolutely. And we are like one fact into the affidavit, right? So this is absolutely huge. Automatically, if I were the police, I'm thinking this is not a random street crime because of the instance of using a swipe ID card, as Brett has noted. The suspect pool is narrowed pretty quickly. 10:40 a.m., Raymond Clark III reports to work at 10 Amistad Street. Clark is a 24-year-old lab technician who tended the animals at the research center. At 11:04 a.m., Clark's ID is used to swipe into the lab room where Annie is. That's lab G13. Clark is seen wearing blue jeans, white shoes, and a dark-colored jacket with white stripes. He also wore a white lab coat. At 1 p.m., a fire alarm goes off at 10 Amistad Street, and people are seen exiting the building. The police later determined that the alarm was activated by steam from an autoclave used to sterilize lab equipment. In other words, it was not a real fire alarm. There was no fire, and it was not a drill. From 11 all the way till 3:45 p.m., Clark's ID shows a flurry of activity. It showed that he went in and out of the lab where Annie was working, G13, and a lab down the hall, G22, a total of 55 times. When Clark leaves for the day, he is seen wearing different clothes than when he arrived for work.
And as Alice has said, this is all from an affidavit related to this case, related to warrants that are issued in this case. And you can see why this information is important. We've talked about circumstantial evidence a lot. That's what the police are using here, is circumstantial evidence that whatever happened to Annie, this guy was involved in it. We have him entering the lab where she was. We have this flurry of activity where he seems to be doing all these kind of things in the area where she would have been, and then he leaves wearing different clothes than the ones he had. None of those things individually prove anything, and even all combined together, they don't prove that he is guilty of murdering Annie, but what they give you is probable cause that he could have some involvement in this case, which allows you to get that search warrant to develop more evidence to keep building your case against him. So by the evening of September 8th, Annie, she's one of these people who spends most of her time at home or at medical school. That's what she's doing. She's not going out a lot. She's either working at medical school or she's back at home relaxing and recuperating. And when she doesn't return home that night, her roommate begins to worry and calls the police. She knows something is wrong.
Very interestingly, her roommate knows something is up very soon. I think she may even start suspecting something in the afternoon. She notes later that Annie often texts her and she hadn't heard from Annie all day. And I believe when her roommate first calls the police, it's probably wise advice. The police say, why don't you call back a little bit later and make sure that she's not just out for a drink or out to dinner or doing something she didn't tell you about, because not even 12 hours have passed, likely she's fine. It was Annie's roommate who actually continued to insist that something was wrong, so that the police actually started acting much sooner than they normally would to declare this a missing person case.
And there's a lesson there. Trust your instincts.
Also, get some good roommates. That's a good roommate.
Get some good roommates, right, who know you and will fight for you. And look, at the end of the day, her quick action is not going to save Annie's life, but for all we know, it may have resulted in her killer being captured or maybe allowed the police to develop evidence more quickly than they would have otherwise. In any event, trust your instincts, follow your instincts, and don't ignore them, because more often than not, they'll be correct. So by 11 o'clock, the New Haven police are investigating Annie's disappearance based on these key card records that we've talked about that indicate that she never left the lab. The search focuses very quickly on the medical school building. I've never been to the Yale Medical School building, but I have a feeling it's probably a pretty big facility. So even though they may think they know pretty much where she was, her body, even if it's still in the building, could be anywhere.
Yeah, Brett, you're right. There's lots of individual buildings that make up the medical school, and this particular building was one of the newest buildings. It was touted as having, the state-of-the-art technology for all the research needed to be part of the Yale Medical School. But this building itself was huge. There were lots of labs, there were lots of floors, and also a lot of people with access to this building.
And I don't know, Alice, what Yale was like, but at Harvard, because it snows so much and it's so cold, all the buildings on campus were actually connected by underground tunnels. So you could get from one building to another pretty much all the way across campus without ever going outside. And I have a feeling the medical complex here was probably similar. You probably could get from building to building even without ever leaving it.
I think that's probably right. There were definitely kind of underground tunnels that connected different parts of the campus. I'm not sure about this exact one, but if there were tunnels, there were probably key card entrances at different points in it as well.
So the next day, Annie's fellow student, Rachel Roth, tells Yale University police officer Sabrina Wood that there was a box of wipes with what appeared to be blood splatters on a cart in the lab where Annie was last known to be. But that was just the beginning. While Officer Wood waited for the FBI to show up and continue searching 10 Amistad Street, she saw Clark walk into Lab G13 and deliberately move the box of wipes so that the blood splatter faced the wall away from plain sight. Clark then, I guess trying to cover his tracks, makes small talk with Officer Wood.
Whew, Officer Wood really picking up on a lot of clues here. And by the way, this is all in that search warrant.
It's amazing how often the person who did it will give themselves away while trying to cover things up. So as the days dragged on without any fruit to this search, Clark continued to work in the lab alongside the officers and the agents who were searching for Annie and searching for clues to what might have happened to her. And you can bet they all have their eyes on Clark now, especially Officer Wood. And Officer Wood notices that Clark is scrubbing a floor drain with steel wool and cleaning solution, which Wood found strange as the floor drain, at least on plain sight, appeared clean. And Officer Wood wasn't the only person to observe Clark cleaning in the lab where Annie was last known to be. Yale Police Sergeant Jay Jones stated that he saw Clark scrubbing the floor under a sink near the drain. Jones said he thought it was unusual because he also said the floor did not need to be cleaned. And it's kind of funny. You often see people try and clean up their crimes, but it's rare that somebody gets the opportunity to clean up multiple times over many days.
And also, like, there was a lot of police presence here. I mean, I wasn't in that building when there was a search, but I will tell you all around campus, everything was taped off. Everything around the outside of this building was taped off. So I can only imagine there was a heavy police presence within the building and in the lab that Annie was last known to be. And for him to just be in, for all intents and purposes, in broad daylight, trying to wipe away what they are now suspecting him to be responsible for is bold, but not uncommon, as we have seen with killers.
In a case like this, it's always surprising to me because you see this guy who's cleaning, he's doing all this cleaning, and yet the police are still able to find evidence. And then you have these cases where it seems like there's no evidence. And, we've talked about murders before where there's seemingly no evidence of who did it. And there's like no physical evidence. And you just think, how is it possible that there's just nothing at this scene? And I don't know, it's one of those conundrums of crime that sometimes there's evidence all over the place, despite the fact people put all this effort into cleaning. And then other times you'll have what is clearly a brutal random murder where there is no evidence of who the person was.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. And some of you may be thinking, well, maybe this is just Clark's job. So we'll get more into what Clark's job was. But I'm frankly surprised that he was able to get past the police to like go into the go into that area and be cleaning. And he was not the janitor, right? We have seen crime scenes where the janitor is called off from cleaning a crime scene because there might be evidence. And here he is just like, he's not the janitor. His job is to keep the animal cages clean, but not necessarily the sink drain clean. And he's like, I imagine him pushing himself past Officer Wood and being, excuse me, officer lady, I need to go clean some blood splatters up. I mean, the boldness is only laughable because he's ultimately caught, as we'll see.
Alice, before we continue, I want to talk about our sponsor, Simply Safe. If you have ever wanted to make your home feel safer, there is no better time than now. This week, our friends at Simply Safe are giving the prosecutor's listeners early access to all their holiday deals, 40% off their award-winning home security. We love Simply Safe because it has everything you need to make your home safe. Indoor and outdoor cameras, comprehensive sensors, all monitored around the clock by trained professionals who send help the instant you need it.
Brett, we really value safety, especially in our profession. It gives me such a peace of mind to know that I can have cameras both inside and outside of my home and that I can monitor it anywhere. Simply Safe was even named Best Home Security System of 2021 by U.S. News and World Report. You can easily customize a system for your home online in minutes and even get free custom recommendations from Simply Safe. These are Simply Safe's biggest discounts of the year. You can get a complete home security system starting at just over $100. There are no long-term contracts or commitments. It's a really easy way to start feeling a bit more peace of mind. So take advantage of Simply Safe's holiday deals and get 40% off your new home security system by visiting simplysafe.com/TP. Again, that's simplysafe.com/TP for 40% off your entire system.
Now, on September 10th, 2009, officers find an extra-large white lab coat with blood stains in a recycling box. This is kind of the first big break. They've been looking for clues and they haven't found anything until this lab coat. They send the coat and box of wipes off for DNA testing, and Annie's DNA is detected on both items. An unknown male's DNA is found on the lab coat collar and cuffs. That same day, Clark comes to the police with information. Note that he is around the police all day the day before, on September 9th, cleaning, but he doesn't come forward with information. It's not until the next day that he comes with information, and I do wonder if it's because they have found some evidence. Like I said, everyone on campus was ear to the floor trying to find out the latest developments. So even if the police were trying to keep their developments under wraps, word was traveling quickly. I think I even remember when this lab coat was uncovered. It wasn't in the news. It was kind of word of mouth on campus. So I'm not surprised if Clark heard about this discovery. So he comes forward to the police and he states that, oh, right, 2 days ago, he saw Annie leave the medical building at about 12:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the fire alarm went off. Now, Clark tells police that he met Annie in early 2009, but he did not socialize with her or have any contact with her outside of work. The officers note that Clark has scratches on his face and arms while they're talking to him. And when they ask Clark where he got those scratches, Clark states that one of his cats had scratched him. Officers, when they're taking statements, they're also using their other observation skills. And if you have scratches on you, you better bet the police will ask you about them because they want to know if those are wounds from either someone defending themselves or some sort of attack that may have occurred. And that's exactly what they did here. So that was good of them to pick up on these scratches. On September 12th, 2009, so now 4 days have passed, and they have found this lab coat, but not much else, not Annie. Until this day, they finally find a sign that might lead to Annie. In the drop ceiling tile, imagine you can push those ceiling tiles up because it's a drop ceiling. The police find a blood-stained rubber glove and a sock. Police also recovered blood-covered boots labeled Ray C, and a blue hospital scrub similar to the shirt Clark was seen wearing on September 8th. Officers also discovered traces of blood that had been, quote, cleaned in the lab rooms. This is a lot of evidence, but there's still no Annie. On September 13th, 2009, police report the smell of a decomposing body in the medical building, so they bring in cadaver dogs to search. At 5 p.m., the dogs have done their work well, and behind a utility panel, the police find Annie's lifeless body. She was wearing surgical gloves with the left thumb exposed. Her jaw and collarbone are broken, and she is bent and squished to fit into the walls. One officer stated, quote, "The killer just crushed her in there. She was like mush. She was so smashed up you couldn't recognize her. Insulation is stuffed around her to try and conceal her body." And this was her wedding day.
It doesn't get much worse than that. And, I don't know that you can ever learn enough or listen to enough of these stories or read enough of these accounts to ever understand how one person could do something like this to another person. And particularly, you should never kill anybody, but at least sometimes you have a reason to. And a case like this, there was no reason for this. There was no justification for this. This person just decided for whatever reason to take this person's life in a brutal way on the verge of what's supposed to be the happiest day of her life. And it's hard to think of something worse than that. But by this point, the police, they have a pretty good idea of who did this. They put together this affidavit that we've been talking about. They attach it to a search warrant, and on September 15th, they execute that search warrant at Clark's apartment, and they obtained DNA samples. It is probably a shock to no one that DNA tests from the recovered sock show a mix of Clark and Annie's blood. A green pen found with Annie's body also contained both Clark and Annie's DNA. With this overwhelming information, police are ready to arrest their main suspect, and that is what they do. On September 17, 2009, Raymond Clark III is arrested and charged with the murder of Annie Lee. And this case hangs around for a couple years as it works its way through the justice system, and then something a little unusual happens, and we're going to talk about this more later. On June 3rd, 2011, Clark, he pleads guilty, but he pleads guilty using an Alfred plea, which we'll talk about more. and he is eventually sentenced to 44 years, which is a long time, but not quite what I would hope he would receive for a crime like this.
Brett, I know the DNA matches, but gosh, the boots that say Ray C on them,
I know.
that's pretty bad. First of all, who writes their name on their shoes anymore when they're like, I label my toddler's clothes when he has to go to daycare, but I don't write my names on my shoes.
Yeah, I think Ray had a few screws loose, possibly. And once again, it's pretty clear Ray Clark did it. I assume nobody out there in podcast world is doubting that. This is a circumstantial case, pure circumstantial evidence case. And you can see why. You can look at that circumstantial evidence, like the boots with Ray C written on it, and the DNA matches, and the swipes of the card, and Ray's bizarre behavior, him telling this story about seeing her leave. All of that adds up to him being guilty. You don't need it on video, and you don't need an eyewitness when you have evidence like that.
Absolutely. And honestly, I would say all the circumstantial evidence, I hope as you've been listening, you're probably yelling at your speakers. Obviously, it's Ray who did this. You see how the circumstantial evidence builds a stronger story than even if we had only one witness say, I saw him go into that room, or, I saw him do it. All of this, it kind of seals the deal that it was absolutely him. I have no doubt. Definitely not reasonable doubt, but I have no doubt that he was the one who did this. But it gets a little more complicated because let's talk about the cause of death. We know she was found dead and smushed into the wall, but what happened to her? The state medical examiner determined that Annie Lay died from, quote, traumatic asphyxiation by neck compression. So in other words, being choked to death. Her jaw and collarbone were broken while she was still alive. Her bra was pushed up and her underwear had been pulled down to her ankles, and semen was found on her underwear and other areas of her body. I'm frankly surprised that they were able to find so much information because many days had passed and obviously her body had decomposed to some state by the time they found her. But what I see or hear so far is that there was certainly sexual assault involved, whether that was the motivator or not. We'll get more into that. And that she was brutally attacked and felt much of this while she was still alive. I've never had my collarbone or my jaw broken, but that causes immense pain, and also a lot of force is needed in order to break those without a fall.
And can I just say, I think, I don't know, we're going to talk about more of this. I have no idea why this guy was able to get off of the 44-year sentence, but this is a brutal, violent, vicious murder. The last moments of her life were terrible, and this man should never see the light of day. The fact he didn't have a life without parole sentence where he would die in prison, that is the best he could hope for. That is mercy, that he can die in prison of old age one day. And this 44-year sentence, this guy is not old enough that we can be sure he's going to die in prison. In fact, he probably will get out one day. And I don't know why he gets to take Annie's life away from her in this horrible fashion, and he still has the opportunity to walk free and to breathe the air again. I don't really understand it. I don't know what's going on here, and it angers me, frankly. Clark, he was 24 years old when he did this. He was a lab technician at Yale School of Medicine. His employment record at Yale had been spotless. He had no disciplinary actions or anything that seemed out of the ordinary. He had no criminal record at all. He was described by fellow employees as pleasant and friendly. At his sentencing, Clark's father said that Clark was raised in a loving and supportive household, going on to say, I say this to underscore how shocked we are to hear that Ray committed this horrible, senseless offense. This is not the Ray we know and raised. We can't explain or make sense of this. But the fact of the matter is there were signs that Clark had a darker side. While his parents may have thought he was all sunshine and rainbows, in 2003, when Clark was still in high school, he was accused of being physically abusive. His then-girlfriend gave an interview after Clark was arrested for Annie's murder. She said, I wanted out. of the relationship because he would get very angry often. He would frighten me. He would get physical. After the breakup, for about 2 weeks, I was escorted from school to my car. This ex-girlfriend felt so threatened that she filed a 2003 police report wherein she also told police that Clark had forced her to have sex with him, but she declined to press charges. And like so many of the cases we see, Clark is a ticking time bomb. He's somebody that is going to do something like this. We talked about the Karina Petrochet case, and this reminds me of that in some ways, where you have this person who is showing signs of violence building up within them, welling up inside of them, and unfortunately, they're not stopped until somebody dies.
And, I think this is a fantastic example of why we always urge people to make a police report, even if you don't want to press charges. This case didn't go to trial, but if it had, it was very helpful that his ex-girlfriend would not only testify that she felt physically afraid for her, for her safety back when she had just broken up with Clark, but that she made a simultaneous or contemporaneous police report at that time because it bolsters her credibility, right? She's not just making this up at a later date because it somehow serves her purpose or she wants to get back at him. She made the report back then, didn't press charges, and we tell this to people because there may not be one thing that is worth, putting someone in jail for. For example, maybe she was like, you know what, he's young, we had a very heated relationship, I just want him away from me, but I don't want to put him in jail for what he's done to me. However, if he has a pattern of behavior like this, and there are patterns of police reports, the police can put this together and hopefully identify these dangerous guys before they get to the point, in Clark's case, where he murders someone. And so we always urge people, these tips, you don't know how it fits into the greater story, but it could help complete a story and possibly convict someone who needs to be behind bars or prevent something more tragic from happening to another victim.
Alice, before we continue, I want to talk about the blue light glasses that started it all, Felix Gray. 5 years ago, Felix Gray realized that our eyes just aren't meant for all the different screens we are looking at all day, every day, whether it's your computer or your smartphone or whatever you may be looking at. It's hurting your eyes, it's causing you to have headaches, it's keeping you up at night. And Felix Gray set out to create eyewear that would improve daily screen time and take care of some of those problems that we've all suffered.
Brett, it's so true. Our jobs require us to look at computers all day long, and I would notice at the end of the day, my eyes would be dry, my head would be hurting, and I didn't realize it was because of all the blue light. Well, with my Felix Gray lenses that filter 15 times more of the most important blue light, I have seen a drastic change in how good I feel when I look at my computer with these glasses. I got the Roebling glasses in Sazerac Crystal, and they look so good, chic, and professional. Whether you're heading back to the office, back to school, or back to whatever, you can count on Felix Gray. Visit felixgrayglasses.com/TP. Non-prescription and prescription are available, so check them out now at felixgrayglasses.com/TP. That's FELIXGRAY glasses.com/TP. Free shipping, free returns, free exchanges. felixgrayglasses.com/TP.
Now, this is already overwhelming. They don't actually have to use the ex-girlfriend's testimony because Clark was charged with murder and attempted sexual assault in the first degree. Now, in a slight, strange arraignment, Clark pleaded guilty to murder, so meaning he takes responsibility and says, I did this, but he takes an Alford plea on the sexual assault. That meant Clark did not agree with the elements of sexual assault in the first degree, but agreed that due to overwhelming evidence, he would likely be found guilty at trial. In other words, he's saying, I'm guilty only because you can probably show it at trial, but I'm not conceding to the fact that I'm actually guilty of sexual assault. Now, this starts making my alarm bells go off in my head as to what I think his motive is. But let's first talk about sexual assault in the first degree and how he can plead the Alford plea. So there's a number of ways to be found guilty of sexual assault in the first degree in Connecticut. Clark is charged by Connecticut state law. This is not a federal case. Honestly, most violent crimes like this, murders, sexual assaults, are state cases because there's no interstate nexus to it to warrant it to be a federal case. The most relevant to this situation is found at 2005 Connecticut Code Section 53A-70A. I say that so you guys can pull it up yourselves and read the statute for yourself. But a person is guilty of sexual assault in the first degree when such person, 1, compels another person to engage in sexual intercourse by the use of force against such other person or a third person, or by the threat of use of force against such other person or against a third person which reasonably causes such person to fear physical injury to such person or a third person. There are other ways you can be found guilty of sexual assault in the first degree, but this is the one that fits. Everything else has nothing to do with Annie and Clark. This is very interesting. Brett, what do you take from the fact that he doesn't agree that that was the situation?
Well, I think one possibility is, as strange as this sounds, that he is more embarrassed about the fact that he raped her than he is that he murdered her. He can admit that he murdered her, but he can't admit to the world that he raped her. And I don't know if that's because this is all the result of some sick infatuation or what he would call love, that he loved her. And he can come to terms with the violence, but he can't come to terms with the rejection. He can't come to terms with the fact that she would never deign to be with him, and that's why he did this. I don't know exactly what's going on in his head, but it feels like it's something like that.
Yeah, that's a great point, that he's okay with saying he murdered her, but not that he raped her. And also, the language within the statute is that you cause fear to someone else and that you use threat of force. It's almost like by not agreeing to this, he's saying that somehow this was consensual, or that in no way did he scare her, despite breaking her jaw and collarbone and, ultimately choking her to death. And that's very twisted, but yet he's fine with saying he murdered her and stuffed her in a wall.
And, you see this when you look at what he said at the sentencing. So we talked about this is 2 years after Annie was killed, and he obviously stayed silent for those 2 years, which is his right. But once he pleads guilty, there's an expectation of an allocution, and there's an expectation that you're going to ask the court for mercy and try and show some remorse to try and get some of that mercy. And he said, I take full responsibility for my actions, which is a lie. He does not take full responsibility for his actions, or he wouldn't be taking Alford plea. I alone am responsible for the death of Annie Lay and causing tremendous pain to all who loved and cared about Annie. I am truly sorry I took Annie away from her friends, her family, and most of all, her fiancé. I have always tried to do the right thing and stay out of trouble, but I failed. I took a life and continued to lie about it while Annie's friends, family, and fiancé sat and waited. I really never wanted to harm anyone or cause emotional pain to anyone. All I wanted was to be a good son, a good brother, and a good fiancé, but again, I failed. I blame only myself, and there are no excuses for what I have done. Annie was and will always be a wonderful person, by far a better person than I will ever be in my life. Definitely true. He concluded, I'm sorry I lied, I'm sorry I ruined lives, and I'm sorry for taking Annie Lay's life. Which, once again, is just a bizarre statement to make when you won't even accept responsibility for everything you did. You're going to talk about how you accept responsibility and all the terrible things you did, but then you're going to turn around and do an Alford plea on the sexual assault. So I don't know. There's some weird psychology there. I think we're right, Alice. I mean, I think this is about this. He just can't accept the fact that, he raped her and that she rejected him. And the rejection, it's like the rejection is so, that's why he killed her, probably. That probably has something to do with why he killed her. And even then, after she's dead and he's standing there apologizing for what he did, he still can't accept the fact that she rejected him, and you see that in his statement. His father also made a statement. He said, "My family's deepest sympathies to the Lay family." And I just got to say, if anybody ever murders me, I don't want their family members standing up talking about how sorry they are about it. It's just, I don't know. I find all this to be disgusting. The grief and tears we shed are equal for your family as well as ours. The events of September 2009 devastated 2 families and shocked a nation. No parent can imagine or prepare for losing their daughter to violence or to having their son commit such a horrible crime. It's just lumping yourself in. I don't know. I'm probably getting a little worked up about this, but just lumping yourself in with the family of the victim, like you're a victim too. I mean, I get it. You didn't do it, and I'm sure this is tragic to know that your son's a murderer, but don't stand up and say this. I mean, I don't know.
It
Anyways,
is pretty
he goes
bad
on
that
to
he
say,
says that everything is equal in their grief and tears.
I know.
Because he still has his son.
Yeah. And he's going to get out of jail one day. I mean, I don't know. This is not the Ray we know and raised. We can't explain or make sense of this. Just, yeah. To me, once again, the whole purpose of this is to try and help their son not get punished as much as he deserves. So if I were, I'm sure the Lay family are probably much more gracious than I am, but I would not have taken this statement very well. And despite the fact that Clark made this statement, he never has explained why he did what he did, why he killed Annie that day.
And no, you guys might have missed that earlier, but Clark was also engaged at the time that he killed Annie. We don't know much about her. She didn't speak at the sentencing. I don't believe that they ultimately got married. She may not have known this violent side of him at all, or maybe she was going to be the next victim. Who knows? But I note that because you'll hear our motive theories in a moment, but it's not like he's just some sad guy pining away in a corner with no girls talking to him. He has a, loving fiance at home, and he does this while he is engaged. Let's dive into some motives because I don't think there's any mystery as to who committed this murder, and even Clark admitted to murdering her. But why did he do that? That really is the mystery of this case. Why was this vivacious, brilliant, young woman snuffed from this earth at the prime of her life, days before her wedding, while she's in the midst of getting her doctoral degree from Yale University? What happened? Now, one anonymous source told ABC News that Clark had emailed Lay to complain about her leaving dirty mice cages behind after one of her studies. Clark had been known to be hard on students who left the cages dirty since it was his job to maintain the cleanliness of the cages. If you Google the story, the first thing you'll probably read is that, he got mad over dirty mice cages and that's why he killed her. I haven't been able to verify that Clark wasn't actually mad about the mice cages or that he emailed Annie to complain about the mice cages. So this has been repeated over and over. Maybe this actually happened. Maybe he did send an email, but I wasn't able to actually verify anywhere, not in the affidavits that are sworn to or the anonymous source posting anywhere or the anonymous source coming forward other than to ABC News that this had something to do with mice cages. Even if Clark was angry about mice cages, it really doesn't explain the sexual assault that occurred. So instead, was this maybe a love obsession gone wrong? After all, Annie was just 5 days away from her wedding day, and this may have been Clark's last chance to convince Annie to be with him instead of her fiancé. But there's no indication that Annie ever mentioned to anyone that Clark had feelings for her, and it seemed that Annie spoke multiple times a day to her roommate, and she was described as being very close to her family and fiancé, talking to them multiple times a day about everything. And another confusing thing about this theory is that, as I mentioned, Clark was already engaged to another woman at this time. He didn't break things off with his fiancée before he decided to approach Annie to try and convince her to, run away with him instead of get married. So there's a lot swirling in there, but one thing I'd like you to get out of this is even though everyone keeps saying this was a murder over dirty mice cages, I am not able to verify that. And I don't think that's the case. You don't rape someone and then murder them because even if you're very angry about dirty mice cages. Now, Brett, I will say, I think it's very possible that Clark planned to talk to Annie that day. Maybe even he planned to have sex with her that day by force, or maybe he thought it could be consensual, or he maybe planned to murder her that day. I think he did plan to be there at the same time. And in order to make sure she was there at the right time, he may have sent an email. And it may have even talked about dirty cages, and that could have been a pretense to talk to her, because otherwise he may not have any reason to be in a room with her or to talk to her. I don't know any of this, but there might be some kernel of truth in something with the dirty mouse cages. I just don't think dirty mice cages is his motivation for raping her and killing her.
Yeah, he didn't kill her over mice cages. I think one of two things happened. I think that's a really good point. I think he very well could have used that as an excuse to get her in the room. To me, I think I've made it clear. I think this is rejection. She rejected him, and he could not handle it, and he did this. I think the other possibility is that this, a lot of rapes are more about power than anything else, and Annie she has everything going for her. We don't know. We know he was engaged, but we don't know what his relationship was really like. She's this up-and-coming person. The whole world is ahead of her. There's no telling what she'll do or what she'll accomplish, and he's stuck cleaning mouse cages at Yale. And it's quite possible that he, for whatever reason, decided that she just wasn't giving him the respect he deserved, or maybe she did not clean the mice cages one time. And it wasn't about the cages. It was about the fact that she was so much better than he was, and he recognized that, and it made him angry. And the rest of it came from that. Unfortunately, we'll never know the answer because he's never going to tell us, and anything he told us would probably be a lie. I mean, he's never going to accept the reality of what he did. And I think that's pretty obvious from both his statements and the statements of his parents. But yeah, I think it's definitely, I've seen those stories too, and it's just amazing what the press will run with sometimes. He did not kill her over dirty mouse cages. That might have been an aspect of this, or like you said, possibly a part of it that allowed him to commit this crime, but it certainly was not the motive. So, as we've talked about before with Eastern Michigan University, whenever a murder happens on campus, there's always going to be some introspection, and that's a good thing. You want that to happen. And after this occurred, Yale came under some scrutiny for its security measures that allowed Annie's murder. At the sentencing, Annie's father said he hoped that as a result of his daughter's death, there will be greater security provided for all students on campus, as well as safer working environments. But I think in reality, while that is a good thing, and the better security and the safer people are, the better, and if that's something that comes out of this, that's a great thing. Annie's murder wasn't the result of a security lapse. This wasn't a random street crime or even a domestic violence crime. It was a workplace crime. Both Annie and Ray had keycard-only access to the medical building. This particular lab had several levels of security because of the sensitive research that took place inside. Furthermore, it housed lab rats, which had been the subject of some peaceful protest on campus. Indeed, it was the keycard badging requirement that helped the police narrow in on Ray, since he was the only person to go in after Annie. Annie and Ray knew each other, but fellow medical students and employees stated that they were nothing more than acquaintances, never seemed to have a close relationship or friendship. But at the end of the day, it's difficult to see what steps Yale could have taken here. Ray had no history of this. I mean, he had some history of violence, and we talked about that, but it's not the kind of thing you would see on a background screen because there were never any charges filed. He's, basically the perfect employee, no complaints, no demerits, nothing. So until this happened, there would have been no sign of it. And it's a scary thing and an unfortunate thing. But in a situation like this, when someone decides to do something like this, it is very difficult to prevent it from happening.
And I think that's why this story really has gripped so many people, and certainly gripped, the campus of Yale. is that, like you said, I don't think, honestly, Yale building security could have done anything. I don't think employing him, they could have taken any different steps. I don't think Annie could have done anything different. I mean, she knew what to look for. She had authored that article just, 6 months earlier. She had street smarts. She didn't put herself in some vulnerable situation. And she was in an incredibly secure building in the morning. This isn't late at night. This is 10 a.m. in the morning. There are classes going on in that building. There's students and professors and other researchers around going in and out of rooms, secure rooms. I mean, I think that's really what's so gripping about this case is until it happened, I don't think anyone really saw it coming. And I think that's maybe why so many people continue to ask questions despite the killer having been captured relatively quickly and having been convicted and serving time in prison, is that we just don't know what motivated him. I think some people think if we can understand why he did this, we can prevent this from happening in the future. But the reality is we see a lot of this, kind of this random crimes of violence, seemingly random crimes of violence that come out of nowhere and surprise everyone involved.
Yeah, and they're scary, and a lot of times they're hard to prove. There was obviously a lot of good police work that took place in this case, and also once again, just this feels like a crime. It might have been planned to some extent, but it feels like something more spontaneous. It feels like something, I don't know that he walked in there that day expecting to kill her. In fact, I don't think he did. And maybe he did, and he's just a really terrible criminal. Absolutely possible, happens all the time. But this feels like something where he decided this was the day he was going to share his feelings for her, and he was willing to leave his fiancée if she would leave hers, or something crazy like that. I mean, there's no telling what's going through the mind of someone like this who would do something like this. And, whatever happened ended in this tragedy. Well, Alice, I'm glad you shared this story with us. I know you've talked about it a lot, and I was always curious about the details. I know a lot of people probably were. Love to hear you guys and your thoughts on this. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. Join us on Reddit. Join us on YouTube. Hit us up on Patreon if you want ad-free episodes. One thing I want to note, this is our last live episode of the year. We are probably going to put out a couple of our Get Vocals over the next couple weeks, so there will be something to listen to. But this is our last substantive episode. We're going to take the next couple weeks to record some cases and get ahead so that our upcoming trial will not prevent us from being able to put out new episodes for you guys. Well, Alice, do you have anything else you want to add before we sign off for today?
No, but thank you guys for indulging me. This case has been on my mind for more than a decade, and I really hope that Annie's family has found peace, knowing that, Annie's not forgotten. She is still honestly talked about a lot on campus, and I know wider than that. She was brilliant, and she used her 24 years well. I just wish that she had the benefit of all the years ahead of her.
Yeah, she will not be forgotten. So you guys keep leaving those 5-star reviews and tell your friends. We'll be back next week with a new case, new questions, and new answers. Well, actually, we won't be back next week. We'll be back in a couple weeks with a new case. But until then, I hope all of you guys have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
That's really sad.
I mean, I guess all these cases are sad in their own way, but it's depressing. This is a depressing hobby we picked up. Should have taken up sewing or something.
No.
Knitting. I'm a great knitter. But brewing. We could have brewed beer together. Oh, stop wasting your time with my blather.
Hardly.